TH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is currently my favorite commander to build around. Yes, I know I just did a video like this about a month ago. I might start doing it regularly, to be quite honest. It does happen, you know, I would say every couple of months there'll be a certain commander that I'm just like, man, I could go this way with it and I can go that way with it. There are just certain commanders out there that there's just a lot of different ways to build them. And once you start going down that road, you just start coming up with more and more interesting ways. I mean, if you're like me, you just keep coming up with more interesting ways to build around them. I already did this video about Lulu originally. I also did this video about Val, both background commanders. This time I'm talking about a non-background commander, and a commander I've talked about a ton on my channel, and I'm talking about it again. People might start getting sick of it. Kethek, Crucible Goliath. And in particular, because of the idea I came up with the secret commander thing, where what Kethek does really, really well is it can hunt for a creature in your 99 really well, obviously, right? So 2 black and a red, Phyrexian Beast, 4/4 at the beginning of your end step. You may sacrifice another creature if you do reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary creature card with a lesser mana value, put it onto the battlefield, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. So what I figured is, I think likely you want a 2, right? You want a non-legendary creature with a 2 mana value, because that's going to be really easy to search for, because of course there's just a lot of creatures that typically would go in any deck, I think, that are 3 mana value that you can then sacrifice with your Kethek to then guaranteed get your creature that you're looking for. Because if you only have 1 or 2 or however many, like for me, I don't want to just build around 1. I want at least a couple that I can build around. That way I can use my commander a couple of times, get more value out of it. I do have lots of creatures that I can sacrifice anyway. Like I have a Burnished Heart in my deck. I can, of course, sacrifice my Burnished Heart to go get lands, or I can just sacrifice it to my commander and go get the creature I'm hunting for. I already talked about this idea on my channel even, and I already made a deck with it. I made the deck using cards like Shadowrite Priest, which has a very powerful effect that I can search for it and then use it to go search for other cards. Blightspeaker was another one I put in there. That this version, it was more of a, I go get creatures that then search for other creatures or other things. Goblin Engineer was another one that I put in there. You could very easily make a pretty fantastic version, I think, with Goblin Engineer and Goblin Welder, which, you know, those are exactly the creatures that I'm talking about, where they're really low mana value, but they have a very powerful effect. And of course, they're not legendary, so you could build an entire deck around them, right? That's the idea, the secret commander idea here. And I really went down the rabbit hole here, where I actually, again, I stuck on 2 mana value or less, and I basically searched every non-legendary creature in the commander format in red and black that is 2 mana value or less, and come up with all the interesting ones that I thought you could build an actual deck around. And I built all those versions. The first one, or the next one, is a blood token option, because I thought Veldarin Bloodcaster was a really interesting creature that you could build around. And I mean, blood tokens also kind of work in this theme anyway, because they do the discard thing, and discarding, you know, looting does work. Looting obviously puts stuff in your graveyard, but it also helps you to filter through your deck and get the pieces you want. Veldarin Bloodcaster, 1 and a black, Vampire Wizard, 2/1. When it or another non-token creature you control dies, you create a blood token. So it's great at creating blood tokens. And of course, we're sacrificing creatures all the time in this deck. It is a little bit of a sacrifice theme. So getting those blood tokens is easy. Whenever you create a blood token, if you control 5 or more blood tokens, transform Veldarin Bloodcaster. And on the back, 3/3 Vampire Wizard with flying. At the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target blood token you control becomes a 2/2 black bat creature token, flying and haste in addition to its other types. I just thought that was kind of a neat one to build around, but of course, it's not the only one you're building around. There are other creatures. That's why I decided to go with this theme, because there was more than one 2 mana value creature that's doing the blood token thing. Restless Bloodseeker is another one. 1 and a black, Vampire, 1/3. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, create a blood token. Yes, there are ways to gain life in this deck. Sacrifice 2 blood tokens, transform Restless Bloodseeker, activate only as a sorcery. So again, it's transforming. And on the back, at the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, create a blood token and pay 4 and a black. Each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So not super great, but 2 creatures that are dealing with blood tokens that are both 2 mana value. And I found a third, Blood Tithe Harvester. Black and a red vampire 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, create a blood token and you can sacrifice it. Target creature gets -X until the end of turn, where X is twice the number of blood tokens you control. And I threw one more creature in here that I thought fit the theme nicely. Dredge Recycler, 1 and a black, Phyrexian Beast 2/2. Tap, sacrifice an artifact or creature. Each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So of course that works with the sacrificing artifact part. We can sacrifice the blood tokens. We can also sacrifice our creatures if we want. And also is gaining us life. So that'll give us triggers for our Restless Bloodseeker, right? So it all sort of works together. I will point out that I have a lot of, again, I did the same thing with the Val decks where I essentially have a template. I have a lot of the same cards that I will be using in all of these decks, like Junk Troller, for example, is in all of these decks. 4 mana, artifact creature, Golem 06, defender. Tap, put target card from a graveyard on the bottom of owner's library. And of course, we need this because our secret commanders aren't going back to the command zone. So if one of our guys dies, it goes into our graveyard and then we can tuck it on the bottom of our library. I mean, we can also use this on our opponents as graveyard hate. Once it's on the bottom of our library, obviously it's now in our library and we can go seek for it again with our commander. Telgiad Stylus will do this for them on the battlefield, right? Well, what if someone exiles our stuff, right? They want to cast a Farewell or a Swords or something like that. Well, tap, put target permanent you own on the bottom of your library. So in response, we tuck that whatever the creatures we're building around on the bottom of our library so that we can go hunt for it again. And Grenzo Dungeon Warden, for that reason, works really nicely in this theme. Of course, it is 2 mana, but it's also legendary, so we're not going to be able to get it with our Kethek. We don't really want to. It just works in the deck. Put the bottom card of your library into your graveyard. If it's a creature card with power less than or equal to Grenzo's power, put it onto the battlefield. So, of course, because we're tucking these creatures on the bottom of our library, we can very easily get them back with our Grenzo as well without having to use our Kethek. So those cards are in all versions of the decks that I have made here. This is the first version. Let's move on to the next one. 7 Dwarves. That is the next version up here. These are all, some of them goofier than others. There is certainly not any super powerful options here. These are all a little on the goofy side. 7 Dwarves is another thing that you can do with Kethek Crucible Goliath. 1 and a red, dwarf 2/2. 7 dwarves gets +1/+1 for each other creature named 7 dwarves you control. A deck can have up to 7 cards named 7 dwarves. So of course we have 7 of these in this deck. It is likely, I mean, it's pretty much a guarantee that you're going to draw a couple of them, and then you're going to use your commander to search for the others. 3, 4, 5 in play at a time is what you're going for here. Obviously, we're doing a little bit of Dwarf Tribal here. I did throw Plundering Barbarian in the deck. I swapped out some of the 3 mana value creatures that I have because, of course, you're going to have a ton of 3 mana value creatures in any version of this deck. You need them to go get your 2 mana value secret commanders. Plundering Barbarian is one I used here that I didn't use really anywhere else. 2 and a red, Dwarf Barbarian 2/2, because it is a dwarf, obviously. When it enters the battlefield, destroy an artifact or create a treasure token. So we can have it come in, do one of those things, and then easily sacrifice it to our commander to go get one of our 7 dwarves. I got Dwarven Blood Boiler as well, because of course we're doing a little bit of Dwarf Tribal here. That's why I swapped out some of the typical 3 mana value creatures I was using for a few dwarf versions. This is another one. It is a 3 mana value creature that we can sacrifice to get a 7 dwarves, but it also has a pretty great ability that works with our 7 dwarves. Tap an untapped dwarf you control. Target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So that's pretty great. This is obviously an aggro-y version, so that's going to be more of the theme here. I put in Street Riot, 4 and a red enchantment. As long as it's your turn, creatures you control get +1/+0 and have trample. So of course, our dwarves that are going to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger, we got like a 6/6 dwarf sitting there. Give it +1/+0 and trample, right? Trample is going to be really important when you have big, essentially vanilla creatures. So a 7/6 trampling creature, that's how you're winning with this version, obviously. Moving on to the next version, and things are starting to get really interesting here. This is probably, I would say, maybe the most unique one I made. I'm building around Pyrotechnic Performer, which just came out in Murders of Karlov Manor. And of course, in that set, you had the disguise mechanic, which this has, and they did the sort of the face up, face down theme in that set. And this guy's actually got a really great ability. It is an ability that, I'm looking for creatures that obviously there's a theme I can build around, but also, especially in this case, it is a theme, like this guy's kind of my win con in the deck. 1 in a red, Viashino Assassin 3/2, has the disguise ability, pay 1 red, play it face down. I don't think you're ever going to do that. Obviously, we're hunting for it with our commander, so it's going to enter the battlefield face up. Could you disguise it if you actually drew it and cast it? Sure, but it's likely you're never going to use that. You're going to use the ability, though. This is what the deck is built around. Whenever Pyrotechnic Performer or another creature you control is turned face up, that creature deals damage equal to its power to each opponent, which can be really, really good. That is the essentially win con in this deck. So of course, if I have my Stormwing Dragon, which I have in this deck, I pay the morph cost, which is 3, play it face down, and then I flip it up for the Mega Morph cost, which is 5 red, red. And when it's turned face up, put a +1 counter on each other dragon you control. There are actually a couple dragons in this deck. And it's a 3/3, so it's going to deal 3 damage to each of my opponents. Now, that doesn't seem great. Paying 7 mana to deal 3 damage to each of my opponents, it's actually pretty bad. However, again, I don't want to just build around 1 creature. I want to build around 2. And the reason I decided to do this version is because I stumbled across another 2 mana value creature that happens to fit the theme. Skirk Alarmist. 1 in a red, human wizard 1/2 with haste. Tap, turn target face down creature you control face up at the beginning of your end step, sacrifice it. So here is a 2 mana value creature, a non-legendary one, that we can actually use to turn our face down creatures face up. So now it's not going to cost 7 mana to turn that Stormwing Dragon face up. It's going to cost 0. We just tap our Skirk Alarmist. And depending on the order in which you get these guys, obviously there's 2 creatures we're building around here, and you're going to get them in random order. So, you know, it could depend very much on when you start doing which thing. You might want to, if you get your Skirk Alarmist, not start flipping creatures up until you get your Pyrotechnic Performer, but it shouldn't be hard to get them both in play. And I will point out the fact that your Skirk Alarmist is forcing us to sacrifice the creatures. That's okay. We can still sacrifice them to our Kethek, right? That's why I really like this one a lot. And this is one I am kind of considering for myself. We can flip those creatures face up, and before they get sacrificed to our Skirk Alarmist ability, we just sacrifice them to our Kethek and get some other creature in play. Pretty great value there, I think. Blistering Firecat also happens to be sacrificing itself, funny enough. 1 red, 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 trample, haste, 7/1. That's a big boy, right? Now we're doing some serious damage, right? When this guy gets flipped up, it will do 7 damage to each of our opponents. That is significant. At the beginning of your end step, sacrifice it. Well, we don't care because, of course, we're going to either sacrifice it to the Skirk Alarmist effect anyway, or we will sacrifice it to our Kethek to go get another creature. So that fits perfectly in this deck. We can pay the red and a red. That's the actual morph cost if we want to, or we can use our Skirk Alarmist, whichever we want. When it gets turned over, it's going to do 7 damage to each of our opponents, and we can also attack with it. So it's going to do a bunch of damage, without a doubt. This is a great fit in the deck, and Ash Cloud Phoenix is another fantastic fit in this version. 2 red, red Phoenix 4/1 with flying. When it dies, return it to the battlefield face down. So of course, we can continually use it. It also, when it's turned face up, deals 2 damage to each player. Again, costs 6 mana to flip it up, but we're never going to do that. We're going to flip it up with our Skirk Alarmist. When it gets flipped over, it deals 2 damage to each player. So I guess that deals 2 damage to us as well, but so what? We're also dealing 4 damage with our Pyrotechnic Performer to each of our opponents. So each of our opponents are going to take 6 every time this guy's flipped over. And then again, we can either sacrifice it to our Kethek, and of course it's 4 mana value, so there's a ton of great 3 mana value creatures in this deck that we will get, or it just dies to our Skirk Alarmist. Either way, when it dies, we return it to the battlefield face down so we can repeat the process. So this guy also is one of the best options in this deck. You just sit there playing your face down creatures, flipping them over with your Skirk Alarmist, dealing damage to all your opponents with your Pyrotechnic Performer. This deck actually performs really, really well. I like this one a lot. The last version is likely the one, I think it's at the top of the list for me. Again, I'm actually considering putting one of these decks together for myself. I don't have a Rakdos deck currently, and I really like Kethek a lot, and I really like this idea a lot. So one of these decks I actually might make for myself, and this one I think is at the top of the list. the creature or creatures that I'm building around here, starting with Sardinian Avenger, a really great card in any commander game. It's the 2 mana value, and it is definitely worth building around, in my opinion. 1 and a red Goblin Warrior 1/1. First strike and trample. When it attacks, it gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts your opponents control. Man, this guy is so good. I talked about it when it came out, and I honestly don't see it much. It's really, really good. The amount of artifacts your opponents control, all of them, unless someone just cast a Bane of Progress, that's going to be like 5 or 6 minimum. So this guy is like a 6/1 or a 7/1 first strike trample. He's rarely going to die in combat. He's always going to be doing a lot of damage. But on top of that, whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put in a graveyard from the battlefield, Sardinian Avenger deals 1 damage to that player. So we're doing damage there as well. And obviously that is more what we're going to be building around. This obviously works fantastically with treasure tokens, which again, if you're not building around that at all, your opponents will likely be doing it. I mean, blood tokens, clue tokens, we have so much of that in the format now. It's very easy for this guy to just sit there and hit your opponent's life total constantly throughout the game. Again, this is a card that we can build around as our win con. This guy can very easily close out games, but we got a very similar version. And again, I like to have at least 2 cards that we can build around here. And we just got one in the big score that just came out, right? Generous Plunderer has a very similar effect and is also a 2 mana value creature. How lucky is that for us, right? 1 and a red human rogue 2/2 with menace. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may create a treasure token. When you do, target opponent creates a tapped treasure token. So we're giving treasure tokens to our opponent, which we want. Of course, that works fantastically with the Sardinian Avenger. It's giving our opponents more artifacts, which it's tapped, so they can't use it right away. And also when they use it, it'll deal damage to them. So these guys are working fantastically together. And also our Generous Plunderer, when it attacks, deals damage to defending player equal to the number of artifacts they control. So again, very, very similar effect to the Sardinian Avenger. So there is 2 creatures that both have fantastic effects that work really well together that we can easily build around. And of course, our 2 mana value non-legendary creatures. And the theme here is a really fun theme, which I like a lot. That's why I think this one is at the top of my list, which is we're giving our opponents treasure tokens, right? Bucknard's Everfull Purse, 2 mana artifact, pay 1, tap, roll a d4, and create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. So we're creating treasure tokens, but then the player to your right gains control of Bucknard's Everfull Purse. So we're handing it off to the next guy, and I guess he doesn't have to use it. It is an artifact under his control, so there's already that. But come on, everyone's going to use it, right? They're going to use it. They're going to create treasure tokens, which is what we want. Pain Distributor. 2 and a red Devil Citizen 2/3 with menace. Whenever a player casts their first spell each turn, they create a treasure token. So we're giving treasure tokens out here, which is great. And also, whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, Pain Distributor deals 1 damage to that player. So this guy's literally doing the exact same thing as our 2 secret commanders. Unfortunately, he costs 3, not 2, but obviously works fantastic in this theme. Descent into Avernus, 2 and a red enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, put 2 descent counters on Descent into Avernus. Then each player creates X treasure tokens, and Descent into Avernus deals X damage to each player, where X is the number of descent counters on Descent into Avernus. So this is handing out all kinds of treasures to everybody, which we want. It's also doing that damage, right? And the non-combat damage theme is something else that I've built around here. Torwaki the Younger works really great here because if another source you control deals non-combat damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage +1 to that permanent or player, right? So I threw a lot of that as well, right? The non-combat damage theme here is a bit of a sub-theme in this deck. Chandra's Spitfire also. Whenever an opponent is dealt non-combat damage, it gets +3, +0 until end of turn, and it's a 1/3 flyer. And of course, our opponents will be sacrificing those treasure tokens, but we can also just destroy those treasure tokens, right? Meltdown, a card that I talked about recently in a video, and you might want to go check out that video if you want to be dealing with treasure tokens. This is a great way to do it, right? We're giving our opponents all these treasure tokens, but then we also have lots of ways to easily destroy them. This, for X and a red, can destroy each artifact with mana value X or less, but of course, treasure tokens are mana value 0, so we just pay 1 red and destroy all those treasure tokens that we just gave to our opponents, and they'll take a bunch of damage off of our Sardinian Avenger, or they'll take a bunch of damage off our Pain Distributor, or They'll take even more damage if our Torwaki is in play, and they will take a whole lot of damage and likely die if our Magnetic Mine is in play. This is the best way to go after opponent's life total. 4 mana artifact. Whenever another artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, it is 2 damage to its controller. So, of course, this does work on us as well. You got to be careful when you play this card. This is going to be I play it when I plan on closing out the game kind of a card, right? So my opponents all have a bunch of treasure tokens, other artifacts as well. Then I play my Magnetic Mine. Then I play, say, my Meltdown or Vandal Blast or whatever. Destroy all those artifacts. My opponents lose a ton of life. Likely I'll kill off a few of them. And if my Chandra's Spitfire is in play, my opponents just took so much non-combat damage. I don't even know how big this thing would be. Easily a one-hit kill, right? So whoever survived the Magnetic Mine and everything else is just going to die to my Chandra's Spitfire. This is a really neat version of this deck. You know, having these 2 creatures that I can very easily build around and having all these other cards that fit the theme of giving my opponents treasure tokens, the non-combat damage theme, all of that. Really neat version of this deck. This is the one that I think I likely might put together myself. And again, the Huggy theme is kind of a neat theme, right? You're punishing your opponents for being greedy. I always like doing those kind of themes as well. Really neat deck. All of the versions of this commander, Kethek Crucible Goliath, who I'm actually building around here, are in the description below. Whole bunch of versions. Any of the ones that interest you, feel free to go after yourself. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.